us. It was brought here to enhance their experiment, because they realized, whoever it was a lot smarter than we are, and they realized that in order for human life to be able to regenerate, they're going to need some kind of an electrical balance or something in science. And so they brought us the moon. And, of course, the moon is just filled with craters. It looks like Vietnam. It looks like it's been battered by comets and meteorites. Where does all that come from? I mean, we've been hit a few times on the Earth, but the moon is blown apart on all the moon. Everywhere is just nothing but craters. How did that happen in our solar system?
Well, you mentioned the hollow theory. I just recently had, first of all, I had Zachariah Sitchin a couple of months ago. And hello, Zachariah. He's going to be with me again in the near future to talk about the Bible. Richard Hoagland also, and Brooks Agnew, Dr. Brooks Agnew, who was with me a few days ago. We talked about this. He said that when the lunar module left the moon, it ejected their aluminum tank.
Sure, and it rung like a bell.
Like a bell. And then on Earth, there's proof out there. This is not conspiracy. When there's a large earthquake, the Earth rings like a bell. And the only way you can have that is if it's hollow.
That's right. That's my point.
So let me proceed with another question. Jordan, I've been following your work for some years now and find it very interesting and insightful. That said, I've always found your embracing of the works of Madame Blavatsky quite curious. You've stated you have all her works and cite her book Isis Unveiled Part 2 and her best and your favorite. And indeed, some of your work seems to correlate with her teachings of theosophy. My question is, how much of her teachings influence your work? And would you consider yourself a follower of theosophy as she describes it? Thank you.
Okay. Good question. I'm being very honest with you and upfront with you. Her work has probably not influenced me at all. I would say, if anything, about 1%. But I have always appreciated people who do deep study on subjects. Manly Palmer Hall was one of my dearest friends, a brilliant man, intellectually astute and brilliant man on philosophies of the world, religions of the world. He had no particular creed that he was pushing, but an extraordinarily brilliant man writing and speaking on subjects which all the human race should be aware of. So when I came across the work of Helena Blavatsky, she was not the only one. At the same time, I was reading and equally as influenced by the Bhagavad Gita, the Vedas, and Upanishads, and the Rig Veda. At the same time, I was fascinated with the works of other German philosophers, French philosophers, Masonic philosophers, which I have enormous amounts of material on the Masonic philosophies around the globe. And so at that particular time when I mentioned that, I was thinking something in relation to maybe the question that was asked, and I was thinking of something she said, and I appreciated all of her work. I do not consider her to be a fool or demonic or evil. She was a woman, a very interesting woman who traveled the world and had something that unfortunately we don't have anymore, and that was an open mind and intellectually honest to read and study and question everything around her. And I admire that in anyone who has an open mind and reads and studies and questions great, and trying to get to the great truths of the universe. I have an admiration for, and I read their work. It doesn't mean I believe everything they've found out or whatever it is they believe, but it certainly helps when you have people like Blavatsky and the great philosophers from Plato and Aristotle. I've read many of these, and it just helps me to keep my mind open. But in point of fact, with your question, I would say she has influenced me probably less than 1%. It's just that I happen to use her as an example once. If anyone's really influenced me, I would say mainly Palmer Hall, because I believe, I've only been looking at this kind of information for 48 years, and my detractors haven't looked at it for 48 minutes.
Right.
But I believe that Manly P. Hall was one of the most incredible humans that ever walked the earth in any age ever. And when you read his, 68 books and hundreds of lectures, written lectures, plus the thousands and thousands of hours of lectures on every subject that the human mind could come up with, and he never once promoted any particular belief system, never had his own personal view on anything. But if you listen to the man and have an open mind and are intellectually honest, you have to agree this is a phenomenally brilliant and fascinating man who had mastered all of the occult sciences, all of the religions of the world, all the philosophies of the world, and was merely trying to explain to we humans, we people, how these things work, what is Buddhism, what is Hinduism, where did this Shinto religion come from, what is Christianity, where does the Bible come from. That's all he did, was explain all the ancient mysteries of the world and where these things came from, and then would advise you to go out and study whatever it is that happens to interest you. Well, when I find people saying that someone like that is worshiping the devil, I know for a fact that this is ludicrous, because the very word devil is simply putting a D in front of the word evil, or taking an O out of the word good, and it becomes God, because the same root word for God is the same root word for good. So take an O out of good, it becomes God, because God is good, and put a D in front of the word evil, and it becomes devil. It's a use of words and terms, and people who are highly educated and intellectually astute know that you cannot brush with a wide brush and say that somebody is worshiping the devil because he's smarter than you are, because he's far more educated and intellectually enlightened than you are, and therefore the only way to handle his brilliance is to call him a worker of the devil, and now you feel much better about it because you don't have to think anymore. No, I know people all over the world who call themselves religious, who cannot hold a candle to the intellectual esteem of some great writers and researchers. And so I have the highest of respect for people who do their homework. I learn from people like Manly P. Hall, as for one. There are many, many good people on the earth who have educated the human family. That's what I want to do.
And I think it's very important to express the fact and to emphasize that just because we study people that we may not agree with does not mean that, folks, we have to be exposed to every perspective in order to know what the other side is thinking.
Well, of course.
Now, another question. Does the quote-unquote Hawk Ring Society have any connection to the early banking merchants of Venice in the 16th century to modern day? Furthermore, does the society have a historical connection to all the military institutions today?
The name of that society was the Hawk Ring?
Hawk Ring Society, yes.
You know what? I've never heard of that. I'll have to do some research on that. I know that whole black nobility coming out of Venice is a very, very powerful story about how Europe was being manipulated by those merchant bankers. I remember as a kid, my family used to have blinds on the window. They were called Venetian blinds.
Yes.
And the implication is but one flip of the wrist, and you cut off all light into the room. And so you are now covering yourself with a Venetian blind. So yeah, I know Venice has been very important, and when you're talking Venice, you're talking Italy, and ultimately you're talking the papacy, you're talking about the divine right of kings, the financing of the Vatican, and ultimately today, the financing and manipulation of world finance throughout Europe. And whoever controls Europe has dominated, let me go back and say this, that for 2,700 years, Rome, under the Caesars in the beginning,